Good morning, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Adam Parrish, and I lead Flexport's trucking procurement for the North America East Coast region. Before we begin, let's cover a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you can see multiple application widgets you can use. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. A copy of today's slide deck is also available in the additional materials on the bottom left. Please ask questions through the Q&A widget on the right. We'll definitely try to answer as many questions as possible throughout the webinar. An on-demand version of this webinar will be available shortly after and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. And lastly, please keep in mind that all information provided in this webinar is presented based on the situation at the time and may not be customized to your specific situation. And so along with me today, we have Joanna Zhang. Joanna is our Ocean Trade Lane Manager for TPEB Floating. Joanna, pleasure to have you this morning.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
And next we have Rohit Krundurthi, who's our Senior Trade Lane Associate, also on the TPEB Floating team. Ro, pleasure to have you as well.
Thank you, Adam. Hey, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Appreciate you all taking some time today to dial in. Thanks.
And last but not least, we have Ignacio Conde, who's our Director of Global Ocean Consolidation Solutions. Ignacio, thanks so much for joining this morning.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm thrilled to be here. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Great. So if you're joining us today, I imagine the keywords scarcity and urgent in the title likely resonate with you, and for good reason. We're all experiencing what is, by definition, the most distressed global shipping market in history across many different areas. And our goal of today's discussion is to talk through what we're seeing, and I could not be more excited about this panel. So let's get started with the agenda. So we're going to break the discussion down into 4 parts. First, we're going to talk about the market conditions overall from a trucking and an ocean standpoint. And the high spring tides play on words probably speaks for itself. Next, we're going to talk about capacity, equipment, and rate trends, followed by lane level overview and hotspots. So this is where we're really going to dive into those different trade lanes and markets that are really the most pressing today. And then finally, we're going to talk about the solutions that we have in place and how to navigate these challenges. And then last but not least, of course, we will finish the webinar with some Q&A towards the end. And so before we get started, we wanted to release a poll with all of our participants this morning. And so here's the question, and would love to drive as much engagement here as possible. We know all of these are likely pain points, but please do your best to select which is the most prominent challenge for you so that we can get a good gauge. And so the question reads, which of the following would you consider to be your biggest supply chain challenge in this environment?
So taking a look at some of the answer choices that have, and responses that have been trickling in here, definitely not really a surprise. This response and this sentiment of space and securing equipment is definitely something that aligns with the market situation right now. And with a lot going on in the overall global transportation market, specifically U.S. import levels being driven to some of the highest levels that we've seen on record, really being driven by the retail and home furniture sector. It's putting a lot of pressure on the world's entire supply chain infrastructure. So we'll definitely be talking today in detail about how we should be thinking about maximizing our ability to secure this equipment. Specifically, we're going to dive into what are the origin regions and destinations that are hotspots for us right now. What are providing challenges to us, and how do we try to navigate around some of these challenges to best position ourselves to be at the front of the line to getting this equipment and really navigating some of these challenging times. So definitely agree with the sentiment that most of you have here, and we'll be sure to be addressing that through the rest of these slides. So now I'm going to pass it over to Joanna, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing in the market on the ocean side overall. So over to you, Joanna.
Thank you, Ro. Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna. I'm the Ocean Trade Lane Manager. I lead the TPEB floating team. Let's take a look at the number of demand of the ocean market. So import from Asia to US reached some of the highest level ever recorded in the past few months. Here's a graphic showing with imports in March 2021 has an increase of 80% compared to March 2020. Overall, consumer demand has been strengthened by strong buying patterns of furniture products and home leisure items, which have represented a strong portion of the 3 million TEU of total imports to the US in March alone. And out of that, close to 1.8 million TEU volume is actually on TPEB trade. So will this demand stop? When will this stop? Currently, there's no sign for slowing down. According to IMF, economy is actually projected to grow 6% of global and 6.4% for US in 2021 and further grow in 2022. So we might expect demand will remain high and strong. The high demand drives the rate higher, while on the other side, under capacity situation with Suez Canal incident is putting current equipment imbalance and vessel shortage in worst case. This situation might extend to Q3 and even Q4. Ocean carriers are shortening the free time this year with new contract season in order to make quicker turnaround to reposition equipment and vessels back to origin. So with this record high volume import to US by ocean, let's take a look at domestic move. Next, I will pass it to Adam for some insight of trucking market.
Great, thank you, Joanna. And so I think from a trucking standpoint, the first thing to note is that the congestion that had started months ago at the coastal ports has now really started to trickle inland throughout the past several weeks. And so the major IPI gateways like New York and LA have had containers dwelling for as much as 3 to 4 weeks, which has caused not only rail congestion to intensify quite a bit, but also has had a pretty heavy impact on IPI transit times. So what we've seen at Flexport is a staggering 300 to 400% increase in rail transit times over the past several months into lanes like Chicago, Memphis, Dallas, and sort of those major hubs. And congestion, of course, does still persist at the major coastal ports, but a lot of the more pressing markets are now the inland ramps, which we'll get into a little bit later in the webinar as well. And separately, it's also become so much more difficult for drivers to pull boxes from the port in this environment, right? Congestion has caused wait times to reach as much as 4 to 6 hours in many cases. And we have to be cognizant that drivers have, legal hours of service, and terminals have specific operating hours and appointment requirements. And so these longer driver wait times and slower throughput at the terminals, of course, translates into less boxes being pulled on a daily basis. So when we think of markets like Savannah and Charleston, drivers could usually pull, say, 7 or 8 boxes a day in a run-of-the-mill market, whereas now they can maybe pull 2 or 3. Figure in New York and LA, pulling one box, maybe two, is a typical day for a driver. And so ultimately, when we put context around ocean imports having increased 15 to 20% effectively overnight, it puts a ton of strain on the market. And simply put, the US just doesn't have the infrastructure to support that type of growth, which I think is a great segue into my next section regarding chassis. So the pools are virtually all depleted at this point in time. So what does that mean? First, it's become much more prevalent for boxes to be grounded off the train as opposed to wheeled, meaning containers are being accumulated in stacks, and it becomes so much harder for truckers and terminals to access them. And second, because chassis are so much more elusive, they typically spend much more time on the street. So because of the increased volume, they dwell longer in truckers' yards waiting for delivery, they sit at warehouses longer, and of course, truckers repurpose them as much as possible in order to get more utilization while they're outgated from the pools. And so in the Midwest alone, the market is actually seeing a 17-day average street dwell. So this really just goes to show how immense the situation is. And needless to say, it's really become a chronic issue. And so lastly here, to tie this back to the congestion that I'd originally discussed, capacity at the terminal level has made it also increasingly much more difficult to not only return empty boxes, but also to move exports as well. In markets like Kansas City and Memphis, we've actually seen the rail carriers impose in-gate restrictions, which actually limits the amount of exports they even load on trains. And so there's sort of a paradox here, right? Because the steamship lines need empties to move overseas for the sake of equipment balancing and to generate quicker exports from origin, yet the terminals don't quite have the space or the wherewithal to take them in. And so those are the few of the main factors we're seeing from the trucking side. And now I'm going to transition it over to section 2, where Joanna will touch on capacity, equipment, and rate trends for the ocean side. And then I'll tackle it from the trucking side as well.
Thank you, Adam. So recently, we've heard a lot about old normal and new normal in the market. Old normal was referred to the market in the past for decades, a permanent state of overcapacity with only short time period of capacity crunch. Now the situation has changed to opposite side, under capacity. So at earlier poll, we saw the same result reflect to the most pain point is actually equipment and space. Suez Canal incident pulled out total 6% global capacity out of the market. For TPEB itself, we can refer to the left-hand side graphic. It shows the most recent 3 weeks. So up to 16% capacity of Pacific Southwest, including LA, Oakland, 23% capacity of Pacific Northwest, including Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, Prince Rupert, and 20% of capacity of the East Coast, including New York, Norfolk, Savannah, Charleston, are all got pulled out due to the blank sailings only. And that's not including other capacity reduction scenarios, such as when carriers downsize capacity by changing to smaller vessels or schedule delay or omit calls. From here, we can do the math. As previously we mentioned, the increase of the demand versus now the capacity reduction in the market. So where are we heading to? These factors mean that the market is at higher rate levels, more premium that provide enhanced space and equipment prioritization at origin, coming with a higher surcharge on top of base rates as a trend in market right now. That's where the cargo move rate is really at. We will do some deep dive in detail on the hotspots by regions and the premium charter options later in this webinar that Ro will walk us through. On the right-hand side, graphic shows the most updated capacity by carriers. We say the potential new normal that ocean carriers are aiming at. They will still grow, but order sufficient capacity instead of overcapacity. We've seen new capacity have been ordered by carriers in the past few months, but that's not going to be a short-term quick solution. We are looking at 2023 to 2024 for these new capacities to enter to the market. And an additional item to note that as Adam just mentioned, the current quite a lot of limitation on IPIs and reverse IPIs from ocean carriers as a result of the bad port congestion and rail dwell situations to avoid further delay at rail and so that carrier can reposition equipment back to origin Asia ports. This will result more shipments are shifting to transload as the solution for full container load, and shippers might want to consider alternative options such as air or consolidation options for partial and urgent orders. So I will stop here with all the craziness going on the ocean side. Adam, can you please walk us through on the trucking side?
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I would love to. Before I do, we actually just fielded a great question from the last section. And that question is, what is street dwell? I think that's definitely worth mentioning because it is quite a pressing topic in this environment. So street dwell is the amount of time equipment, whether that's a container or chassis, is outgated on the street. So when a trucker goes and pulls a container from the port or from the rail, that trucker, of course, has that container and chassis in their possession from the time that they outgate with that container, get the freight delivered, and then ultimately return it back to the port or the rail. And so dwell time hinders the turnaround of this equipment to be repurposed for other business, right? So if we imagine a 17-day chassis dwell in the Midwest from what I had mentioned in the last section, in markets like Chicago and Kansas City, what's happening is containers are being pre-pulled and they're storing in the yard for more extensive amounts of time than usual because warehouses are backed up. Trucking capacity is obviously at its lows. And so naturally, every day kind of accrues more quickly than in a run-of-the-mill market. So when we think of dwell time, that's really what we're referring to. And definitely a good sort of segue into the next section as well as it relates to the drayage side of things. So yeah, thanks for going through that, Joanna. And I want to start by saying that in the drayage world, capacity is definitely becoming a lot more tenuous. Carriers at this point can be anywhere from several days to 3 or 4 weeks booked out in some of the major markets. And as I touched on in the last section, drivers' productivity has decreased immensely within every facet of the drayage leg. So it's not just pulling boxes by last free day. It's also getting those boxes delivered timely to the customers, returning those empties back to the port or to the rail. In fact, last month, there was a survey conducted in the Port of New York to address the recent impact. And the consensus was about a 40% decrease in productivity, which we can extrapolate across the board in other markets as well, like like LA and Savannah and so forth. So we can all imagine what a 40% decrease in productivity has in terms of an impact to the general operation with the truckers and the warehouses and so forth. And so from a rates perspective, of course, just general rates and cost exposure have, of course, increased by a pretty substantial margin this year. On the spot market, rates have gone up as much as 50 to 100%. So if you're calling a carrier to book a transactional container, your quote could very well come back as much as double what you've paid historically on the lane. This visual in the top right of this slide is a perfect reflection of this, illustrating 3 lanes going to Pennsylvania and Massachusetts and upstate New York, and the year-over-year all-in cost increases, all of which, of course, as I mentioned, are between 50 and 100%. So really hard to budget for. But again, that's just on the spot market. I think even more importantly, we've seen GRIs on contract and tariff rates this year of around 10% on average, in some cases even a lot more. And there's a couple factors to this, but diesel fuel itself has increased 25% year over year from this time last year. And we have to figure that fuel is anywhere between a quarter and a third of a carrier's operational expenses. So fuel on a schedule or as part of an all-in rate, the market's really facing an increase there. And then again, I think just to tie this back to the original decrease in productivity, and as it says in the title of this slide, that kind of speaks for itself, right? Less efficiency and productivity on the land side is going to generate higher rates to cover that additional operational costs, exposure, as well as overhead and so forth. And above all, accessorial exposure has also increased dramatically. And the reason I think this is the most important area for our clients to focus in on is because in this type of environment, as we know, accessorials can often make the biggest dent on an invoice. So things like excess chassis days and yard storage, port congestion fees, demurrage, per diem, these are all becoming so much more prevalent, and they're really a byproduct of the challenges that we're up against in the market. So we really do encourage our clients to try to think end to end when assessing rates, because what might appear to be the cheapest price up front is usually far from it on the back end, right? So putting a lot more focus on service and reliability is key. And so that's sort of what we're seeing from the trucking side. Ro, why don't you walk us through some of the high pressure regions in terms of the lane level overview and hotspots as it relates to the ocean market?
Definitely. Thank you, Adam. So as Adam just mentioned, and as we've been talking about so far throughout this webinar, we're all well aware of the challenges that we're facing in the market right now. And we know that really there are challenges across every single lane that you all are shipping on. Amidst these challenges, however, there are a few hotspots, both at origin and destination, that are facing unique challenges. And I want to double click into some of those right now so we can be a little bit more tactical about some of the challenges and regions that we're seeing these challenges in. So let's start with origin first and double click into the first region that I want to highlight, which is North China. When we say North China, we're talking about the region that is serviced by the base ports of Qingdao, Tianjin, and Dalian. What's happening in North China is that there has been an extreme lack of available equipment in the region, with even premium services having a difficult time securing that equipment in a timely manner. So what does this mean? This means that there are significant delays from the time a booking is placed to when actual vessel departure occurs. This is a metric that we track internally called booking to ATD. And oftentimes carriers in the region may not have available equipment to even accommodate some of the bookings that they've already accepted. So this poses extreme challenges, and I've seen a lot of questions that have been sent to us so far in the webinar are around some of these delays of, hey, I'm placing a booking and getting put on a departure, a few weeks down the line or longer than what I would have expected. And this is something that's definitely being observed in North China specifically, and it's a derivative of this equipment issue. The lack of equipment available there is pushing out some of these departure timelines. And as the first set of departure timelines get pushed out, that creates this snowballing effect where new bookings get put towards the end of that timeline and the clock restarts. So that's definitely a reality. And that pain point that you all are expressing is something we're definitely seeing on the ground in North China. Another region that I want to highlight that has extreme challenges right now is Southeast Asia. Now, this is one that I would venture to guess many of you have a supply chain footprint based in Southeast Asia, or have explored moving a majority of your supply chain footprint to the Southeast Asia region. And carriers are seeing that as well. They've indicated to us a strong surge in overall demand coming out of Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Cambodia, specifically in the past few months. And this is consistent in all parts of the market. The amount of new premiums and vessel opportunities in the region is a byproduct of the extreme demand for services in Southeast Asia. And even with this season's annual contract negotiations with carriers, all carriers indicated that there was far more demand for negotiated rates in the region than they had the ability to accommodate. And in Southeast Asia, we're seeing a lot of the complications of what we're observing in North China as well. There's an extreme lack of available equipment in the region. And what is almost further complicating some of the issues there is the difficulty that carriers have of repositioning equipment that they do have available to where clients and shippers actually want it. And sometimes this is manifesting itself even within a country. Many of the feeder ports that connect with the base ports in Southeast Asia are suffering from this lack of available equipment, which means that oftentimes shippers are going to need to arrange for pickup from ports where the equipment is available. For example, let's say that a shipper's initial preference is to ship out of Haiphong in Vietnam. However, available equipment is only in Ho Chi Minh or Kai Mep, which is a larger port, and generally there's more empty containers available there. That's almost a 1,800 kilometer distance or journey that they would need to take to be able to bridge that gap and actually find the available equipment. And so the reality is, and it is a harsh reality, but it is something that we're experiencing day to day. Shippers who show up to where the empty equipment and empty containers are the ones that are getting it. And even ahead of, in some instances, verbal or on the ground guidance as to what could be available where, or at certain periods of time, finding that available equipment and being flexible and nimble enough to get to those regions is really key right now as we navigate these equipment challenges. So we talked a little bit about origin. I want to move into talking about destination and what are the hotspots? Where are these regions that we're seeing challenges on the U.S. side? So on the destination side, we're observing similar pockets of difficulty as we've seen on the origin side, with the biggest challenges being volume into the U.S. East Coast, volume into the Gulf, and inland volume, specifically inland volume routed via the East Coast. These are often referred to as reverse IPI movements or RIPI movements. These are those inland routings that will go via New York, Savannah, Charleston, into locations like Chicago, Memphis, Dallas. We've talked a lot so far about some of the challenges on East Coast routings, and those are owing to the impact of reroutes around the Suez and associated delays there. The impact of the aftermath of the Suez Canal is going to be hitting us in the next few weeks with the delays of the reroutes, and that's going to hit the East Coast the hardest. The blank sailings to the East Coast that Joanna mentioned earlier are literally taking capacity out of the market, and this is impacting your ports of New York, Baltimore, and Savannah the most. And we're seeing those challenges manifest themselves right now. Additionally, we're seeing challenges emerge on routings to the Gulf. Not all carriers have services that call Houston, Mobile, New Orleans via all water services, and therefore the surge in demand to this region has put a lot of pressure on shippers who traditionally use these services because their supply chain and their delivery destinations have always been near these ports. A lot of clients are using creative solutions to get as close as they can to some of these East Coast locations and ship into these Gulf ports and truck to the final destination. So that's crowding out some of the traditional shippers to the Gulf regions. And then lastly, we've highlighted the limitations that carriers are placing on inland cargo overall. Now that's doubly so felt on inland routings via the East Coast, where your departures are not only getting delayed, but also the amount of cargo that's being accepted all the way inland is being restricted by the carriers. Now, Adam, your team and our teams are joined at the hip here, and I'm guessing that a lot of the hotspot ports at destination that I just highlighted, these are really the starting off points for difficulties that you're seeing on the trucking side. Would you say that's true? And handing it over to you to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing happen at some of these rail yards in terms of available trucking capacity?
Yes, definitely. And so well said, Ro. It most certainly is true. I think with that in mind, what we're seeing at destination is sort of more of the same of a lot of what Ro touched on at destination. So something to call out here is that we are seeing the wet ports in marginally better shape than what we experienced in Q1. Though, again, I do want to emphasize that, of course, that is all relative. These markets are still extremely congested, but just a bit off their peak from the last few months or so. And so due to the trickle-down effect that I mentioned earlier, right, from the wet ports to the inland ramps, those are really where we're seeing the most dire straits at the moment. So if we look at this map here, we have on the coastal side, New York, Charleston, Savannah, LA, and Oakland. And then from an inland side, we have Chicago, Kansas City, Ohio Valley. So that includes Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. And then moving southbound, Memphis, Atlanta, and Dallas. But I do want to call out that, other markets like Baltimore, Nashville, Detroit, just to name a few, can also reflect the same magnitude as these larger markets. So even though they're not in this visual, that's not to discount any of those other markets. And what we're seeing there, the goal here is really to illustrate the ones that are really acutely suffering. So I do think ultimately one secular trend that we might continue to see is the coastal ports easing up just slightly or stabilizing to some capacity in the short term, while the inland ramps continue to get squeezed. Which brings us to the next section to chat through some potential solutions. And I think that's really a great segue into the first point here being transloading. So transloading is really one of my favorite topics to talk about. There are likely tons of clients on this call with whom I've discussed transloads with already. And so, as you know, they can offer a lot of value add for clients in general. And there's such a great method to circumventing the IPI congestion. Some of you may have heard me say that I like to think of transloads as sort of an insurance policy against your transit time disasters. So to address the elephant in the room, yes, transloads will cost more upfront, but there's also a couple ways to interpret this. First is predictability both on service and price. So with rail congestion and transit times up 3 to 4x, as I had mentioned earlier, your container could be sitting on the train for as much as 2 to 3+ weeks for what's otherwise a 4 or 5 day transit time. And that just becomes incredibly difficult to plan for in your supply chain. And so from a pricing standpoint, rail freight has created so much more exposure to accessorial charges on the back end. So when we factor in things like rail congestion fees, demurrage, chassis splits, excessive yard storage days, the net cost increase is actually alleviated quite a bit. And by getting that shipment turned around in, say, 48 to 72 hours, once off the port, you really get that predictability that you need. And so an idea here is to think about maybe just moving a portion of your IPI volume via transloads. And so if you can peel off even a subset of your volume to shift to do a dray transload and then a full truckload to the door, it'll really create some diversification and give you some form of protective measure and even a competitive advantage for your supply chain. So, with that, we really do encourage our clients to do a cost-benefit analysis and just identify some opportunities there. And definitely worthy to work with your service providers to do so. And so with that, solutions, of course, by no means end at just transloads. So Ro, why don't you walk us through some of the ocean strategies as well?
Perfect. Thank you, Adam. So like Adam mentioned, solutions don't end on kind of the trucking or land side. We do have a couple other strategies here on the ocean side that can cover the gamut of your supply chain needs. And definitely the name of the game here is going to be flexibility and agility. The solutions that we're going to have will help us keep supply chains moving as we navigate around some of the challenges in the market. So the first one that I want to highlight, and likely really one that many of you recently have probably availed to some degree or explored at least, are these premium services, charter vessel opportunities, and extra loaders that come into the market and have been popping up with more frequency in the market recently. I specifically want to call out charter vessels and extra loader opportunities. So what these are one-off vessels that carriers will run on only a handful of lanes. So they'll only call a few, usually only 3 to 4 base ports, and only call only a handful of ports on the destination side. And carriers are running these because they can capitalize on extreme demand in a few regions that they know they'll be able to utilize 100% of their available space on a vessel. And these opportunities are important for you all because they come with some of the highest levels of enhanced equipment security that you can get in the market at any time, since these are one-time sailing deals. Once you book and you get the space is yours. However, the kind of flip side to these opportunities is that they are first come, first served. So space fills out extremely quickly. The key here is really, once you hear about this opportunity from us, definitely move and identify to see how much volume I can get and fit onto this opportunity and get those bookings placed in the system as quickly as possible. That's going to be the way that you maximize securing your spot on the vessels and making sure that you can really chip into backlogs that you might have piling up, or get some of that urgent cargo out of port in Asia and on the water as quickly as possible. And then lastly, one strategy I definitely want to highlight here that we're going to speak to in more detail in a few more slides is leveraging consolidation services. If your supply chain needs to stay moving and every CBM counts with your products and your specific unique supply chain needs, then consolidations are going to be a great way to keep your supply chain moving, even if there are congestion issues on the FCL side. Our Director of Global Consolidation Solutions, Ignacio, is going to be speaking to this in more detail in a few slides, but definitely a strategy here that we should be open to availing, and one where if your supply chain counts by the CBM, definitely something that we should be looking at. Now, we know that at some point, every client and everyone is going to face an urgent situation where your inventories need to be replenished, or volume just needs to move immediately as quickly as possible, no matter the circumstances and environment that we're facing in the market. One way that we can help sidestep some of those challenges is by leveraging our network of fast boat services. So these services don't only just come with faster on-the-water transit time and end-to-end transit time. They also have expedited destination services such as priority discharge and expedited rail to inland locations. They also provide some of the highest levels of equipment prioritization and security from carriers because they are that top shelf, highest level of premium service in the market. So for shipments where you need the best possible line of sight into whether or not you have equipment secured, what specific sailing that you're looking at and targeting, and you need your goods to arrive to the States by a certain date, we highly recommend targeting one of the routings highlighted above on the screen, because we have a fast boat service that could line up with your supply chain needs and will give you the level of service that you are looking for. So now, as I mentioned earlier, definitely want to hand it over to Ignacio to be able to talk a little bit more about our consolidation services in this market, which are a great solution for some clients.
Thank you very much, Ro. So as we've been saying, like, flexibility is key for supply chain survival these days. So here at Flexport, we've been trying to leverage ocean consolidations for our customers more and more, and we've been having a great success with this strategy. Obviously, we acknowledge that consolidations cannot solve the capacity crunch, right? This is more targeted to medium or smaller customers, for which, as Ro was mentioning, every CBM counts. So, with these solutions, we've been able to provide, 30, 50, 80 CBMs per week of capacity. And that can really make a difference for small customers that they are facing with a complete stop on their supply chain. The way we are doing this, it's by not just leveraging our own network, so Flexport own capacity network, but also our partner co-load network. So again, just we have a conversation with the customer, we understand what's their needs, and then we prepare a plan. We split the capacity between our network and co-loader network, and then we just execute that plan towards. So we are being able to provide with some relief to these smaller customers that are really facing tougher times. And one product that I want to particularly touch upon is Ocean Match. Ocean Match is a Flexport unique solution that matches empty or not a fully utilized container with some LCL cargo that comes from other Flexport vetted customers. So what Ocean Match does basically is to improve utilization across the whole industry, right? Because we see some capacity that is underutilized, and we match that capacity with LCL shipments, combining and fully utilizing the container. Obviously, that's great in these times. And Ocean Match, it's pretty unique to Flexport. The way it works is that we provide savings to the headload customer, which would be the Ocean Match shipper. And then we also provide a lot of flexibility, reliability, and control with our technology, because we have these products in a way that we use less handling, and we can obviously provide faster turnaround times than LCL. I really encourage all of you to reach out to us, ask about Ocean Match, but not only Ocean Match, because we also have other solutions for consolidations, like the premium solutions from different ports. Because again, we've been applying this strategy lately in Flexport, and we've seen a lot of success, specifically amongst the smaller customers that really don't have access to capacity in these times. So really looking forward to touching that. And with this, I'm going to turn it on to Adam again for the Q&A section.
Great. Thank you, Ignacio. So we have fielded a ton of good questions, and in the interest of time, let's dive right into it. I think we have a couple that are sort of more overarching questions that have to do with both ocean and trucking. So the first one here is, what can I do to best position my company for success, given all of the challenges discussed today? So I'll kick this off from a drayage perspective, and then I'll kick it over to maybe you, Joanna, or Ro, to also discuss it from an ocean standpoint. But what I would say from a trucking and from a drayage perspective is that in this type of environment, you don't need to have the most volume to win. You want to have the most attractive freight for carriers, right? So things like drop programs at your warehouse, and doing things in the interest of getting them in and out of the door much quicker than usual is huge, because the drayage market is very heavily owner-operator driven. And so these drivers effectively work for themselves and contract with the drayage companies. So in the interest of there being a ton of volume moving around the US right now, the more attractive your freight can be from an operational standpoint, making sure that it's properly loaded at origin, making sure that drivers at the warehouse are getting in and out as quickly as possible, and also making sure that if and when possible, you're shipping legal weights, are always things that just help right off the top. And I also think it's important, to Ro's point earlier in the discussion, to consider routing options not only by rail ramp, but also down to the terminal level. So what we're seeing is in markets like Chicago and Memphis and Kansas City, where there's multiple terminals, sometimes a dozen or more terminals, some of them are a lot more congested than others. So in Chicago, for instance, it's not quite as painstaking to go into, let's say, the CP as it is the CN Harvey ramp, right? So making sure that you're talking to your providers about that is pretty instrumental and can really set you up for success at destination. And then I would also encourage all of our clients to just work closely with your service provider whether that's your forwarder or your drayage carrier directly, to really make sure that you have an intimate understanding of what the issues you're facing are. I know that there's these sort of thematic, challenges that don't seem to be going away anytime soon, but really digging deep and understanding exactly what those acute challenges are as it relates to your supply chain is going to be huge, because then you can formulate solutions based on what your particular challenges are. And, I think there's always a difference between carrier-specific issues and market-wide issues, and being able to decipher between the two, I think, is huge. And, moving around to find greener grass, especially in this market, could really easily backfire. So really make sure that you understand what those issues are and work with your providers to, of course, try to devise an action plan and a solution moving forward. So Joanna, Ro, anything to add from an ocean perspective as it relates to being in the best position possible?
Sure. Thank you, Adam. I'll take it. So based on what Adam said, I 100% agree. So utilize all the options you have. I recommend be open and be flexible on the routings. So right now, as what I mentioned, and as what Ro showed, the hotspot, we are seeing Gulf, East Coast are really, really bottleneck at this moment, and especially with IPIs and RIPIs really. As Adam mentioned, not just the drayage facing the challenges, but also ocean carriers, because of the serious delay and vessel shortage and equipment reposition, they have to utilize have shorter free time to make sure to reposition the equipment back to origin port as soon as possible. So they are really limiting right now with IPIs and RIBI. They prefer base ports. So transload will be a good option from there. And hope everyone, the shipper can really consult, talk to your supplier, logistics supplier, to check on all the options and be open-minded about it. And also send forecast with volumes, weekly volumes per estimate, more accurate. That's going to be more helpful. And send this ahead of the time, so that your freight forwarder or your service provider, they can plan and putting this in their pipeline. Booking and submit a booking also early as possible. Right now, I think at least 2 to 3 weeks before the actual planned departure date will be recommended. We are seeing this longer, excuse me, we are seeing this longer leading time for the bookings. So right now, because of the auto pile up, and also carrier side have a lot of backlog as well, they are having some internal extra loader just to carry out their own products at certain pockets. So definitely need to book early as possible, and that will be really helpful with the whole supply chain, just to plan out. So that's the recommendation from the ocean side. Plan ahead, send a forecast, accurate forecast, and maximize all the options. Be flexible of the routings. Thank you. I'll give back to Adam for the next question.
Thanks, Joanna. I think another good question here is one that we're all probably pondering. When do we foresee the market to stabilize, or do we expect these volumes to persist throughout the entire year? Ro, you want to take that one?
Yeah, definitely, Adam, and I definitely agree with what you said on, this is one thing that we're all thinking about, from the carrier side to the forwarder side to the client side, of course. This is the big important question, and one that we have and are gathering a lot more data on to get an educated estimate of what we think and what we're seeing in the market, to be able to provide some more guidance. So I'd say that the optimistic estimates at this stage, and really probably the best case scenarios, project that this current market is going to continue through the end of the summer. And how do we know that now? One, and really probably the key indicator here is where are booking levels at? Because from the carrier standpoint, who is really at the kind of the starting off point for where the challenge is and some of the backlog originate from, if the carriers are indicating, hey, look, our booking levels and what we are projecting are already taking us through the next few months, then that is already a starting off point for us to base the rest of our projections from. And if those booking levels persist and show up as we progress through May and progress through June, then that timeline for when we would see a softening of the market will start to get pushed out a little bit more. And as that gets pushed out through the summer months, we get closer and closer to that golden week time period of around October. And that really is almost a turnkey point to where we can get a gauge for how long we would expect this next round of peak, almost as, so to speak, to last for. Because if we start to enter Golden Week with strong continued demand through this market, then we know that Golden Week is a traditional peak season in the market as well. And we're going to see the normal surge in overall import volume that we would expect to see pick up around that time period. Now, once we get through Golden Week, we enter the traditional US holiday season where, again, we would normally expect to see increased volumes overall. Now, as we get through that time period, we then start to enter and start thinking about pre-CNY and moving volume up ahead of CNY. So it is a very sensitive and I would say there are a lot of dynamics at play here in terms of where we think the market will go and how long this will last. But I will say that the baseline guidance that we are internally using and what we are helping guide our clients in navigating and really calculating through this market is thinking about it from the perspective of, if demand remains strong, likely for the next few months and through the rest of the summer, and we do get to kind of that Golden Week period where we have seen this continued strong market, there could be a scenario where the market continues in this fashion for months up through pre-CNY, and that's one thing that we of course all don't want to see, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on existing supply chains here. But I think it is something that we are preparing for using some of the data that is really the best indicator of where the market will be. And that's our existing and carrier booking data. So I think that's kind of our, internal estimates as far as what we expect to see with the market. Of course, there are so many other dynamics at play and exogenous shocks that could take the market one way or the other. But I think based off of what we know now, that is the way we see it internally.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ro. That was good, nice, comprehensive touch point there. I'm going to take this next question because I think it's important and I really like it. Chassis now have become the most bottleneck for port and rail pickups. And what would be the best scenario for BCOs next year to tender activity on chassis? Is it still good to include the chassis into the ocean carrier annual agreement, or would it be best to source the chassis solution from the dray carrier? So I think there's a lot to unpack there, but what I'll say is that unfortunately on the chassis front, as we know, there's no silver bullet, so to speak, that'll insulate any of us from the equipment shortage, because it is much more of just an existential issue that stems back. So I would say that the steamship lines today are still largely at the mercy of the shortages, and they don't quite have the jurisdiction over the chassis as much as they used to. And so I think it's important that you kind of weigh your options and understand that when you get chassis as included in your ocean contract, there's kind of twofold there. It's price and it's the actual equipment availability. And so the latter is something that, we're still going to be at the mercy on. But I do think it's important to seek out providers, whether that's your forwarder or drayage carrier directly, that have their own private wheels. So you definitely don't want to be in a position where you have, let's say, a high volume lane running with either a drayage carrier or a forwarder that solely relies on the pools, because of course they won't have as much leverage and control. So that's one thing to look out for. And then that's just a simple question too that clients can ask, right? And make sure that your forwarder is working with drayage carriers that own their private wheels. Now, again, private wheels are only a subset of the overall equipment pool out in the field. So one thing to take note of, but I think premium services too is sort of what Ro touched on before. These services from an ocean perspective can offer really good kind of fast boat options and so forth. And then at destination, things like preferred gate access, priority discharge, and perhaps what I would think to be one of the most important in this environment is guaranteed wheels within 12 to 24 hours. So just a few things to think about there. And then we only have a few minutes left, so I'll try to do one or two more questions. I'd love to ask Ignacio a great question in terms of Ocean Match. Do I need to ask for Ocean Match, or is this option automatically rolled into my requested quotes? Ignacio, what do you say about that?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for asking the question. So obviously Ocean Match is in our product portfolio, but I would recommend you definitely to ask for it because remember, Ocean Match targets FCL containers that are not fully utilized. So usually people shipping FCL are not very used to LCL many times and the way it works. So I think it would be great if you specifically ask for Ocean Match, because then we can explain exactly how it works. How do we match your shipment with other LCL shipments? How do we move that through our supply chain to the warehouses, and what can you expect in terms of transit times, price savings, obviously, which is gonna be important. So yeah, definitely please ask for the service, and Flexport representatives will be able to help you with that. I've seen also some other questions regarding LCL pricing. Obviously, as you know, on average, LCL is going to be more expensive than FCL, but at the same time, you just pay for the space you use. So at the end of the day, you probably would be saving money if you are not utilizing full containers. But obviously, in this market, the grace of LCL is that we're gonna keep your supply chain moving, even if it's not fully. At least we're gonna provide some capacity, so you can see that supply coming. So thanks for that, Joanna. What about you? Do you find any interesting question before we wrap up?
Thank you. If that's possible, I'll take the last one. I saw this question due to the delay in vessel return to origin, we are seeing ETDs out of China and Taiwan push out multiple times after booking. Are there any efforts being taken to give more accurate ETDs at time of booking? So that's a great question. I would say not just China or Taiwan, and also apply to Southeast Asia as well. We are seeing the schedule are behind, and carriers are really serious, behind the schedules of serious delay. More than 2 weeks delay, they're gonna put down the blank sailing. That's why we are seeing more blank sailings in the market and subject to change as well from time to time. So as short term, we know that carriers right now, that's why we see the new contract season with shorter free time at destination detention. And carriers are really pushing hard on it so that they can position back the equipment back to origin port quicker. That is like what is changing in the market for this year. And also that carriers are really limiting like IPIs and repeats to avoid rail. That's why the base port actually become more preferred. And that's where we are seeing as a trend in the market as well. So basically like really encourage everybody like to utilize all the routings that's possible at this, especially during this market. And carriers are making efforts to go back to accurate ETDs as much as possible. As I said, they are also like with the market, how much they grow. We are seeing from the numbers. This is like going to be the long run, but more capacity is coming in, but it's going to be like something not for the short term. For short term right now, we have to deal with the current situation, work with your supplier to make sure that you have the accurate setup and set up the correct expectation as well. Utilize all the options you have. I think this will be like not going to be a short term challenge in this market, at least last like couple months, as what Ro mentioned, and we are seeing this last at least until the golden week. And after that, the market, we will see how that really trend, but there's nothing like really sign for slowing down at this moment. So yes, given that said, I think I'll get back to Adam to wrap up. See, we are at the time.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, that just about brings us at time. So I want to thank everyone for joining yet again. And like I said, an on-demand version of this webinar will be available shortly after and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So hope everyone has a great Wednesday. Thanks again for your time this morning. And we look forward to continuing to roll out further market updates as usual. So appreciate everyone's time today.